All right, let's take you back now to the United Nations Security Council meeting on the situation in the Middle East.
One mistake could lead to the unthinkable, a full-scale regional conflict that would be devastating for all involved and for the rest of the world. The moment of maximum peril must be a time for maximum restraint. I reiterate my strong condemnation of the serious escalation represented by the large-scale attack launched by the Islamic Republic of Iran on Israel on 13 April. The use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations, is prohibited by the Charter. And, as I stated earlier this month, when I condemned the attack on the Iranian consulate in Damascus, the principle of inviolability of diplomatic and consular premises and personnel must be respected in all cases in accordance with international law. It is high time to end the bloody cycle of retaliation. It is high time to stop. The international community must work together to prevent any actions that could push the entire Middle East over the edge with a devastating impact on civilians. Let me be clear, the risks are spiraling on many fronts. We have a shared responsibility to address those risks and pull the region back from the precipice. The way to do so is by advancing comprehensive diplomatic action for de-escalation in the Middle East. Mr. President, it starts with Gaza. Ending the hostilities in Gaza would significantly diffuse tensions across the region. I reiterate my calls for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire and the immediate release of all hostages held in Gaza. The horrific terror attacks by Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups on 7 October, including mass killings, the use of sexual violence, torture, and the taking of hostages, were an intolerable denial of the most basic values of humanity and the breach of the most fundamental rules of international law. In Gaza, 6.5 months of Israeli military operations have created a humanitarian hellscape. Tens of thousands of people have been killed. 2 million Palestinians have endured death, destruction, and the denial of life-saving humanitarian aid, and they are now staring down on starvation. An Israeli operation in Rafah would compound this humanitarian catastrophe. The casualty figures are overwhelming and unprecedented in speed and scale during my time as Secretary General. According to UNICEF, more than 13,900 Palestinian children have reportedly been killed in intense, often indiscriminate attacks. All this has happened with severe limitations imposed by the Israeli authorities on the delivery of humanitarian aid to people in Gaza who are facing widespread starvation. Israel recently made a number of commitments to improve aid delivery, and there have been some examples of limited progress. 3 WFP convoys with a total of 25 trucks were authorized to use the Erez crossing in northern Gaza on 14, 15 and 16 April to deliver food parcels and wheat flour. The operating hours of Kerem Shalom and Nitzana crossings have been expanded from the Israeli side, but security concerns mean the hours could not be expanded to the same extent on the Gaza side. Some bakeries have resumed operations in northern and central Gaza, the first to reopen in months. But apparent progress in one area is often cancelled out by delays and restrictions elsewhere. For example, although the Israeli authorities have cleared more aid convoys, those clearances are often granted when it is too late in the day to make deliveries and return safely, one can say that our personnel cannot operate in darkness in a war zone littered with unexploded ordnance. So the impact is limited, sometimes nil. The clearances increase, but there are continued obstacles to aid for people who are in desperate need. During the week of 6 to 12 April, Israel denied more than 40% of UN requests that required passing through Israeli checkpoints. We urgently need meaningful, measurable progress, including, for example, the unrestricted delivery of aid via Ashdod port and restarting of the Nahal Oz water line. To avert imminent famine and further preventable deaths from disease, we need a quantum leap in humanitarian aid to Palestinians in Gaza. Food is essential, so are clean water, sanitation, and healthcare. This means addressing the challenges impeding delivery on the ground. Humanitarian agencies, led by UNRWA, which is the backbone of our operations, must be able to move food and other supplies safely and via all possible routes and crossings into and throughout every part of Gaza. That requires improved delivery systems around all supply routes and entry points. Humanitarians also need security. Nearly 250 aid workers, including more than 180 of our own staff, have been killed in Gaza. I repeat my call for thorough investigations into this tragic death. Just last week, a UNICEF vehicle traveling with a convoy was caught in crossfire. Delivering aid at scale requires Israel's full and active facilitation of humanitarian operations, including through a functioning humanitarian notification system and improved and direct communications between humanitarians and military decision makers on the ground. This is essential and must be implemented immediately. For the moment, our aid operations face enormous difficulties and are barely functional. They cannot operate in an organized, systematic way. They can only seize opportunities to deliver aid whenever and wherever possible. And humanitarians alone cannot address the enormity of the needs in Gaza. The private sector is critical. Increasing commercial traffic is essential. What is needed is clear: an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza, the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, and the unimpeded delivery of humanitarian aid. The international community has a shared responsibility to do everything possible to make this happen. Mr. President, a comprehensive de-escalation approach must also reverse the explosive situation in the occupied West Bank. More than 450 Palestinians, including 112 children, have been killed in the occupied West Bank since 7 October. The majority by Israeli forces in the course of their operations and in exchanges between Israeli forces and armed Palestinians. Others were killed by armed Israeli settlers, sometimes in the presence of Israeli security forces who reportedly stood by and did nothing to prevent these killings. Last year saw the highest number of such attacks and incidents of violence and intimidation against Palestinian communities since the United Nations began recording them in 2006. 17 Israelis, including one child, have also been killed in the occupied West Bank and Israel since 7 October. In addition to this number, the reported killing of a 14-year-old Israeli boy over the weekend set off another wave of armed settler attacks against at least 37 Palestinian villages in the occupied West Bank. 4 Palestinians were killed, including a 17-year-old boy. I condemn all violence against civilians. I urge Israel to make immediate steps to end the unprecedented levels of settler violence and to hold accountable those who have perpetrated such attacks. And I call on Israel as the occupying power to protect the Palestinian population of the occupied West Bank against attacks, violence, and intimidation. The backdrop to this appalling surge in violence is the continued expansion of Israeli settlements, in themselves a violation of international law, and repeated large-scale Israeli operations in Palestinian areas. Declarations that areas now constitute Israeli state land, together with legal decisions that strengthen settlements and potentially increase demolitions and evictions, risk undermining the contiguity of a future Palestinian state and, in I hope, to a generation of Palestinians. Israel and the international community must support and work with the new Palestinian government to address its fiscal challenges, strengthening its governance capacity, and prepare it to assume its responsibilities in Gaza in the future. I urge all actors to recognize the critical role the Palestinian Authority should play in Gaza and works towards enabling its return in the appropriate time. Mr. President, the ultimate goal remains a two-state solution, Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace and security, with Jerusalem as the capital of both states on the basis of UN resolutions, international law, and previous agreements. That means an end to the occupation and the establishment of a fully independent, democratic, contiguous, viable and sovereign Palestinian state with Gaza as an integral part. The international community has a responsibility and a moral obligation to help make this happen. Mr. President, regional de-escalation efforts must also address the extremely fraught situation in Lebanon, particularly along the Blue Line. Exchanges of fire between Israel forces and Hezbollah are exacting a mounting toll on civilian communities in Israel and Lebanon. Dozens of civilians have been killed and tens of thousands displaced on both sides of the Blue Line. These exchanges could take on a momentum of their own. Strikes deep into the territories of Lebanon and Israel could ignite an even more serious confrontation, as we have seen in the past. I call on all parties to exercise maximum restraint and avoid further breaches of the cessation of hostilities under the framework of Resolution 1701. The United Nations stands ready to support the efforts of several countries to encourage de-escalation and to work towards a diplomatic solution. Mr. President, regional de-escalation efforts must also ensure the safety of navigation on the Red Sea, respecting the rights and duties relating to maritime navigation in accordance with international law. Houthi attacks on merchant and commercial shipping continue to disrupt global trade. They have been met with strikes by the United States and the United Kingdom. Armed confrontations on this crucial waterway increase risks across the board. Risks to supply chains, risks to an environmental disaster from a damaged cargo ship or oil tanker, risks of a serious escalation and a confrontation between major powers with appalling political, security, economic and humanitarian repercussions. All attacks on merchant and commercial shipping on the Red Sea must end immediately. The international community must act together to prevent escalation in the Red Sea that would exacerbate tensions and undermine regional peace and security and international trade. And the people of Yemen must be supported towards a political process for a sustainable and just peace. Mr. President, the Middle East is on a knife edge. Recent escalations make it even more important to support good faith efforts to find lasting peace between Israel and a fully independent, viable and sovereign Palestinian state. Failure to make progress towards a two-state solution will only increase volatility and risk for hundreds of millions of people across the region who will continue to live under the constant threat of violence. I urge every government involved to use its influence and leverage to promote trust building, mutual security, and regional peace. We have a shared moral obligation to advance a comprehensive Middle East de-escalation effort in order to reduce risks, increase stability, and pave the way towards peace and prosperity for the countries and people of the region and beyond. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary General for his briefing. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Ziad Abu Amr, Special Representative of the President of the Observer State of Palestine.
Primary audio circuit for the
floor to His Excellency Mr. Ziad Abu Amr, Special Representative of the President of the Observer State of Palestine.
Mr. President, Your Excellency, the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is my honor to join you today in this important meeting. I would especially thank you, Mr. President, for holding and presiding over this ministerial meeting. I would also like to express the gratitude of the State of Palestine to the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for his wise leadership of this organization, especially given the catastrophe that is currently happening in the Gaza Strip. I would also like to thank Algeria for placing the Palestinian cause as a priority on the agenda of the Security Council, including the membership of the State of Palestine in the United Nations. We would also like to express our thanks and gratitude to the countries that recognize the State of Palestine and the peoples of the world that believe in our right to self-determination in our land, the State of Palestine. We also thank the countries that developed their relations and that cooperated with us. And we do hope that these countries will recognize the State of Palestine as soon as possible, based on the principle of sovereign equality between nations and mutual respect. We also renew our gratitude to all countries that supported Palestine receiving the status of observer state, and the states that called on the Security Council to look into and consider the full membership of the State of Palestine in the UN. We also thank Arab countries and the non-aligned movement for joining this request based on the Riyadh summit. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the plight of the Palestinian people has started over a century ago and is still ongoing. The Palestinian people was the victim of events and international resolutions and decisions that were outside of their control. The Palestinian people is the victim of a history that is not of their making. This people has suffered a catastrophe in 1948 and the Israeli occupation since 1967. We are still longing to practice our right to self-determination, to live in freedom, security, and peace in an independent state, similar to other countries around the world. We have made and continue to make great sacrifices to achieve this goal. Since 1988, the Palestinian leadership, represented by the PLO, the only legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, the Palestinian leadership has showed preparedness to close the chapter of conflict and sit at the negotiations table to find a just, comprehensive and permanent solution for the Palestinian question. In this regard, we have made every possible genuine effort. We have made unimaginable historic concessions in order to achieve a peace that is based on the two-state solution, to guarantee the establishment of an independent Palestinian state that is sovereign along the lines of June 4, 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital, in addition to resolving the issue of Palestinian refugees based on Resolution 194, a Palestinian state that lives with its neighbors in security and peace. Since 1993, the Palestinian leadership chose the path of negotiations, hoping that these negotiations will result in the desired solution. The international community supported the principle of the two-state solutions, and this position culminated in accepting the State of Palestine as an observer member in the General Assembly of the United Nations in 2016. And since then, the State of Palestine has sought and has called on the world to accept it as a full member of the United Nations, because we believe that an international resolution of this regard will protect the two-state solution and will reflect the Palestinian people's legitimate right to an independent state. However, unfortunately, some try to hinder the adoption of this resolution under weak pretenses. Granting Palestine full membership at the United Nations will lift some of the historic injustice that succeeding Palestinian generations have been subjected to. It will open wide prospects before a true peace based on justice, a peace that the countries and the peoples of the region will enjoy. In this regard, it is our right to wonder, how could grant and recognize Palestine, the State of Palestine, how could granting the State of Palestine full membership at the United Nations, similar to other countries around the world, how could this damage the prospects of peace between Palestinians and Israelis? How could this recognition and this membership harm international peace and security? This question, ladies and gentlemen, we ask it specifically to the United States and other countries that oppose granting the State of Palestine full membership at a time when they recognize Israel, which is the other party in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and has granted Israel full membership at the United Nations. And to those who say that recognizing the Palestinian state must happen through negotiations and not through a UN resolution, we wonder, once again, how was the State of Israel established? How was it recognized? Wasn't that through a UN resolution, which is Resolution 181? Although Israel did not honor the conditions to accept its membership at the United Nations, and that is implementing Resolutions 181 and 194. Such a decision to grant the State of Palestine full membership will be an important pillar to achieve peace in our region, because the Palestinian-Israeli conflict in its different dimensions now goes beyond the borders of Palestine and Israel and impacts other regions in the Middle East and around the world. Therefore, we believe that it is high time for the Security Council to shoulder its historic responsibility to give justice to the Palestinian people by adopting a resolution to accept Palestine as a full member of the United Nations. Those who are trying to disrupt and hinder the adoption of such a resolution, they are not helping the prospects of peace between Palestinians and Israelis and the prospects for peace in the Middle East in general. This resolution naturally will not be the alternative for serious political negotiations that are time-bound to implement the two-state solution or relevant Security Council and GA resolutions and to resolve what is the pending issues between Palestinians and Israelis. However, this resolution will grant hope to the Palestinian people, hope for a decent life within an independent state. After this hope has dissipated over the past years because of the intransigence of the Israeli government that has rejected this solution publicly and blatantly, especially following the destructive war against the Gaza Strip and after the reoccupation of the Gaza Strip by Israel. In this regard, the State of Palestine would like to express its thanks to all the countries that recognize the State of Palestine and sincerely and seriously supported granting the State of Palestine full membership in this international organization. Ladies and gentlemen, over the past 12 years, after Palestine was granted observer status at the General Assembly, the State of Palestine played a positive and constructive role in your august organization. So we do hope you will give us the opportunity to become an integral part of the international community that is working to achieve international peace and security. Mr. President, today we are asking for full membership for the State of Palestine at the United Nations. However, this does not mean that we forgot what is happening in the Gaza Strip. This comprehensive destructive war waged by Israel against our people over the past 6 months. It has claimed the lives of over 35,000 Palestinians. 80,000 were wounded, mostly women, children, and the elderly. They have destroyed most vital facilities in the Gaza Strip. They've destroyed homes, routes, hospitals, schools, universities, mosques, churches, water and energy supplies. They have displaced the majority of the residents of the Strip. The majority of the Strip is now they cannot live there anymore because it was destroyed. Gaza will come back. What will be destroyed is the occupation. The attacks of the Israeli army continues. They continue to terrorize our people in different cities, villages, and camps in the West Bank and in Jerusalem. It is high time for this war and for these attacks to stop. It is high time for this occupation to end. Your august council, we call on you today more than ever to swiftly intervene and take the necessary measures to compel Israel to put an end to its aggression, to allow the delivery of humanitarian assistance to a starving people, to immediately withdraw from the Gaza Strip, to comply with international law and the resolutions of international legitimacy. The international community cannot stand idly by while a country is above international law and enjoys impunity. Israel shoulders the full responsibility for the great destruction that the Gaza Strip has suffered from because of its continued aggression. It is also the responsibility of countries that has supported Israel with weapons and funds, that has provided Israel with political protection. We rely on peace-loving nations to end this war, to end this aggression, and to provide support and relief to the residents of the Gaza Strip. Everyone must recognize, Israel particularly, that security cannot be achieved with endless wars as long as occupation stands. A peace that is based on justice, this will achieve security and stability for all. History has taught us that our region will not enjoy stability without the establishment of an independent Palestinian state along the lines of June 4th, 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital, to live in security and peace with its neighbors. Ladies and gentlemen, an international resolution to grant Palestine full membership at the United Nations under these dark circumstances, and as the war of full destruction continues against the Gaza Strip and its residents, this international resolution would be a rejection to aggression. It would insist on respecting international law, human rights, and the right of the Palestinian people to live in freedom and dignity. This is the perfect time, ladies and gentlemen, for the international community and your council to shoulder their political, legal, and moral responsibilities towards the just Palestinian cause and the right of the Palestinian people to freedom and independence, so that the principles of justice and peace can prevail. I trust that you will stand with the Palestinian justice. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Abu Amr for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished ministers, colleagues, Secretary General, how many times has this Council met to discuss ways to advance the release of our hostages held in Gaza? How many times? Not even once. How many condemnations has this Council issued against Hamas or for their heinous October 7th massacre? Zero. Zero. Yet rather than condemning Hamas's atrocities or taking action, real action, to bring our hostages home, this Council will be voting upon a resolution to recommend granting the Palestinian Authority full membership status, a Palestinian state. How detached from reality can this Council be to dedicate its time and resources to support a resolution so disconnected to the reality on the ground? To a resolution that will have zero positive impact for any party, that will cause only destruction for years to come and harm any chance for future dialogue. Colleagues, 6 months after October 7th, the most brutal massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, this Council seeks to reward the supporters and perpetrators of these atrocities with statehood. The child-murdering Hamas rapists are watching this meeting and they are smiling. There is no bigger prize for terror than today's meeting. Let me remind everyone, the basic requirement for admission to the UN are A, permanent population, B, defined territory, C, government, and D, capacity to enter relations with other states. But, above anything else, a very important principle stated in Article 4 of the UN Charter is, and I quote, membership in the United Nations is open to all peace-loving states. Peace-loving. What a joke. Does anyone doubt that the Palestinians fail to meet these criteria? Did anyone hear any Palestinian leader even condemn the massacre of our children? The Palestinian Authority has absolutely no control over Gaza. You all know it. Everyone knows it. But even in Judea and Samaria, entire neighborhoods and cities are ruled by other terrorist gangs, Lion Den, others, and the Palestinian Authority, ironically, has no authority. So who is the Council voting to recognize today and give full membership status to? Hamas in Gaza, Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Nablus. Who's going to be in charge? While this in itself is grounds enough to reject this sick reward for Palestinian terror, the Palestinian Authority is the opposite of a peace-loving entity. The Palestinian Authority not only have not condemned the October 7th massacre, they are also paying monthly salaries to all the terrorists that took part in it, rewarding the rapists. This is a genocide-loving entity that doesn't deserve any status here. But sadly, to some of the members here, the Palestinians' inability to meet the criteria simply doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because to some of you, Palestinian statehood has nothing to do with the UN Charter or legal criteria. All it has to do with is politics and interests. The UN Charter is important to them only when it can be used against Israel. The report from the Council's Commission on the admission of new members even states it black on white. Let me quote from clause 3 of the report, your report. And I quote, "Several members expressed the view that the admission of the State of Palestine to membership in the United Nations was a political matter rather than a technical or legal requirement." In other words, UN Charter be damned, international law be damned. I reiterate, international law and the UN Charter are only important when they can be weaponized against Israel. But if breaking the law means advancing the unilateral establishment of a Palestinian terror state, a Palestine Nazi state, then by all means. They're just empty words on paper, right? What this Council has decided to focus on at the expense of all other calamities around the globe is to grant a prize to terrorists. Granting the perpetrators and supporters of October 7th full membership status in the UN is the vilest reward for the vilest crimes. If this resolution passes, God forbid, this Council should no longer be known as the Security Council, but as the Terror Council. The only thing that a forced unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state will do is to make any future negotiations almost impossible. As long as the Palestinians feel that they can exploit this politicized body to their benefit, why would they bother at the negotiating table or support any compromise? Do you honestly think that this resolution will make a solution more likely or change anything on the ground? The Palestinians have rejected every peace plan ever made, and they continue to support terror and boycott negotiations. And now they know that their rejectionism pays off. They can say no, no, no to any American president, but still get here what they demand, because the UN is guided by politics, not morality or truth. All this Council is accomplishing through this destructive approach is making a solution unattainable. The UN is no longer about multilateralism, sadly. It is now committed to multi-terrorism. At the Security Council, terror pays off. It's shameful. I have always called out the political rot within the UN, that sadly nothing here is based on truth and justice, but toxic politicization. And today, the mask has finally fallen. The Council has exposed itself. Please, do not give in to politics. Do not support this dangerous resolution. How can you support a resolution that is so destructive and immoral at the worst possible moment? Colleagues, the Council was not the only entity to expose its true face this week. On Saturday night, with the launch of over 300 UAVs, ballistic missiles and cruise missiles at Israel, the Ayatollah regime's mask also fell. Iran exposed itself as the terror state that it is. But today marks another milestone in the Ayatollah regime's blood-soaked history. On April 18, 1983, a Chevrolet pickup truck packed with 2,000 pounds of explosives sped through the gates of the US Embassy in Beirut, crashed into the building and detonated. This blast killed 63 people. You're talking a lot about embassies and the importance of embassies. And Hezbollah claimed responsibility. And today, April 18, 2024, exactly 41 years later, this council, the Security Council, will be addressed by an arch-terrorist whose regime funds, arms, trains, and directs Hezbollah. The Ayatollah regime's foreign minister, Hussein Amir Abdollahian, is a member of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. This terror organization, the IRGC, is responsible for carnage, bloodshed, and destruction worldwide. From terror attacks in South America and assassination plots on European and American soil to arms trafficking in Africa and terror sponsorship across the Middle East, the IRGC is in the business of murder. The IRGC is a designated terrorist organization, not only in Israel, not only in the United States, in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. Both I and my Arab and American colleagues agree that the man who will address this council later today is a terrorist. And his presence here on today of all days is further proof of how the UN has become a haven for dictatorships and terror regimes to whitewash their crimes. Colleagues, it is Iran that ensured Hamas was able to orchestrate the October 7th massacre. It is the Ayatollah regime in Tehran that has provided weaponry to Hezbollah to rain down missiles on Israeli towns and cities. It is the Ayatollah regime in Tehran that has equipped the Houthis with cruise missiles to fire at merchant vessels. And it is the Ayatollah regime that launched an unprecedented attack at Israel, a fellow UN member state, less than a week ago. Yet, instead of designating the IRGC as a terror organization and sanctioning Iran's evil regime, the Security Council opens its doors for Iran's foreign minister, for a terrorist. Can you not see what is going on here? Terror Minister Abdollahian is not here to express sorrow for his regime's brazen attack and tell this council that the Islamic Republic has changed its ways. He is here to make a mockery of you. He is here to show you all, in your suits and with your diplomatic niceties, that his country can launch an attack on another member state on Saturday, and then he can come here on Thursday to lecture you all on human rights and international law. Minister Abdollahian's presence here today is making this institution a joke. Sadly, it is clear to every dictator and terror state that the UN has lost every ounce of justice, and it is now a blob of politicized plasticine that can be molded however the tyrants choose. And the Council plays along with this destructive charade. Colleagues, if you still believe that this body holds any relevance, then I ask you, I even beg you, what action has been taken by the Council against Iran for its attack against Israel this week? The foreign minister of a genocidal regime will speak here today as his country hurtles towards nuclear weapons. Has this Council taken any action to prevent this? Nope, nothing. Instead, we have gathered today to discuss the situation in Gaza. Has it occurred to any of you that the terror minister Abdollahian is here to make sure that you focus on Gaza as opposed to his own regime's crimes? Sadly, you are being spoon-fed a script. It was written by Khamenei and edited by Sinwar, a script crafted by terrorists. Due to Khamenei and Sinwar's script, terrorists commit acts of sheer evil against Israel, they exploit civilians as human shields, and when Israel defends itself, the UN will pressure Israel to a ceasefire and ensure their survival. The terrorists know that nothing captivates the UN's attention more than Israel. As long as Israel is defending itself, all other human rights violators can continue committing crimes. Your eyes will remain on Gaza as the rest of the world burns. And this is precisely what is happening today. You sit here focused, again, on Israel, focused on Gaza. We will hear talk of international law, human rights, and many other terms this council loves to toss around. But in reality, this council, as a council, cares nothing about human rights or international law. You even refused to visit our communities in southern Israel, and I invited all of you, that were devastated by Hamas. Everything is political and distorted. You know better than most that the Ayatollah regime is mere weeks away from nuclear capabilities. This global sponsor has proxies across the region, sowing death and destruction. But Iran has immunity here, because this rogue regime has allies here on this council that protect it and its terror proxies. This is the reason why you will never designate Hamas and Hezbollah as terror organizations, despite the whole world knowing that they are. A war still rages in Ukraine, as the country that started it sits here on this council preaching about peace and the defense of civilians. This is a backwards world. This week, we mark the one-year anniversary of the war in Sudan. Millions have fled their homes. Millions more starve. Countless civilians have been murdered. Since the start of the war in Sudan, has this council held a single minister-level meeting on the atrocities? No, not one. But today marks the fourth Ministerial Security Council debate on Gaza. The fourth. 4 on Gaza, and not one on Sudan in the past year. The double standards here know no bounds. The amount of time, effort, and resources poured into Gaza makes it seem as if the rest of the world is a pure utopia. That outside of Gaza we live in a carefree world, Hakuna Matata. The only people this meeting serves, and I reiterate, are Ayatollah Khamenei and Yahya Sinwar. Some of you may think that you are serving the Palestinians, but you're not. By holding this meeting, you are aiding Khamenei and Sinwar. They control the agenda here, and hardly any of you seem to notice. Colleagues, if the UN cannot prevent wars or defend human rights, it has lost any reason to continue operating. The day will come when this organization will be shuttered. The UN, as we know it, will cease to exist, and in its place will stand a body that truly cares about human rights, that truly fights to promote peace, that is capable of putting politics aside for the sake of justice, morality, and humanity. And when that day comes, and it will, this meeting and the vote to force the establishment of a Palestinian Nazi state will be remembered as catalyst of the UN's collapse. A meeting where the world burned, but all that concerned the Security Council was helping terrorists in Gaza survive. A meeting where a terror entity could be given full membership status. This is how far the UN has fallen. And this is why the UN, in its current format, has no future. I truly pray for brighter days, for a time where the UN can successfully combat the forces of darkness, not welcome them and be influenced by them. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Israel for their statement. I shall now make a statement in my national capacity. I thank the Secretary General for his presence here today and for his stark and sobering brief. The Middle East is experiencing one of the bleakest and most volatile periods in modern history. As underlined by the Secretary General last Sunday, the Middle East is at the brink of a full-scale conflict, one which we need to collectively avoid by calling on all parties.
Well, a number of developments there outside of that UN Security Council meeting, the situation in the Middle East, a lot to unpack. From SA Today team, we will be handing it over then to the Full View team, who will unpack everything that has transpired, including earlier on our breaking news story, the US imposing new rounds of sanctions against Iran. That and plenty more coming up right here on the channel. Stay tuned. From me, Unati, and the team, Kamnandi.